Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by a gentleman that I've known for a number of years. Actually, I knew about him, and I got to observe and listen to him speak before we actually met, truly, outside of the, hey, thanks for speaking and shaking his hand. Today we have retired firefighter, veteran, Marine, Mike Washington. He's currently a mental health provider, a total badass, a warrior from start to finish, and what he's doing today. Cancer survivor. I mean, I could keep going and going, but I've heard him speak multiple times to the first responder community about his own experiences. I've been able to actually collaborate more recently, sadly, as oftentimes we sadly collaborate over tragedy with Deputy Dom Calata's passing, and being able to do what I believe is one of our most important functions, which is peer support for our first responders, for our brothers and sisters. So without further ado, Mike, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric, and that great introduction. I'm kind of wondering, who's he talking about?
Yeah, right. I'm talking about the Gerber baby of Hawaii. From, I'll let you say the year. I'll let you do your thing. But man, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, healthy baby of Hawaii, 1965.
Okay, yeah.
And, I could have went Gerber, but it never happened. That's the next level. But yeah.
Okay, I misremembered. So I'm glad you provided that clarification. Takes you down a little peg, but only for yourself, not in our minds. Yeah. Well, Mike, why don't you just start with coming up, after being the healthy baby of Hawaii, and what led you to a life of service?
Well, that's a good question. I think a lot of us have taken hits, along the way, and especially when you're a child, because you're, the most vulnerable, be seen and not heard kind of thing. And I grew up in the '60s, and that was definitely the idea, and where corporal punishment was very harsh back then. And so, you had that. I had alcoholism in my house. There was violence in my neighborhood. Growing up in Hawaii, I witnessed somebody break into our house and try to kill my mom, and and all these things kind of pile up. I was molested as a child, and what we often do is that we just say, okay, forget about those things, and it works for a little bit, but they remain, and they can radiate on you. And when I say radiate on you, it's just like they don't go away, they don't disappear, and that's because we're not meant to forget. As human beings, we're meant to remember everything, and we misfile them, we ignore them. It just ends up going in a big whirlwind, and but at some point these things can come back on you, and for me, that was exactly what happened. After we moved to California when I was 11. That's where I went into the Marine Corps, and then from the Marine Corps into the fire service down in San Diego County. So I go from being, I don't like to use the word victim, but the victim of a number of things as a child, to raising my hand and saying, send me to your bad things. I want to be that guy. And sure enough, if you're in law enforcement or fire, they will oblige that, because that's the business that we're in. And at the time, I joined the fire service in 1986 as a reserve, and was full-time in '88. We didn't have peer support. We didn't talk about these things. So it really didn't matter what the call was. We were going to talk about what's for lunch afterwards. And if it was bothering you, you just kind of kept it to yourself. That's just what you did. I stayed in the Marine Corps Reserve, and was activated for Desert Storm, where I saw combat with 2nd Light Armored Infantry Battalion, 2nd Marine Division. So now I go to that person who's visiting violence and death on other people and seeing things that you can't unsee. and then subsequently 3 more deployments, and still being with the fire department. Just adding, and I'm not doing anything to take a look at it. And my first real episode now, and this is me looking back. Now I can look back and go, these signs and symptoms started to come out after Desert Storm. Now they weren't just Desert Storm. As a matter of fact, I think in the moment they may have been as much as all my experiences in life all coming together, and Desert Storm was the thing that just punched it all together.
Yeah.
And so I would have these these emotional reactions to things and anger issues and things like that. And I could feel them coming up, much like people who work with epilepsy. They can feel that seizure, about to happen. And I'd go find a place to be by myself and just choke it back and then get back out there. But I think the seminal moment for me was when my son was killed in action in Afghanistan. That was one I'm not going to come back from. And that just opened the floodgates to everything. And the funny thing is that, I was on the peer support team in the Seattle Fire Department for 25 years. Had anybody come up to me and said, boy, I've just gone through all these things, Mike, I don't know what to do. I'd know exactly what to say and how to get them to help and everything else. But pride and ego and, any number of things that we can put a label on just made it so I couldn't do that with myself. And I just kept it to myself and just kept bubbling. And those episodes were getting more intense. My marriage failed, and so it was just one hit after another until I found myself at the end of my rope. And for me, and I think for a lot of first responders, that one of the things we do is what's called risky behavior. A lot of us do things off shift that are, people climb, rock climbing and hiking, extreme hiking, extreme this or that. And I think for those of us who get into that space, we turn to those things and we go super extreme on them. Now, I'm not a rock climber. I'm not an extreme hiker, but I rode motorcycle, and I'd ride it very dangerously. I'd go through intersections, just close my eyes and just see, okay, how do I get out on the other end? And, okay, you made it this time, maybe not next time, because that was a preferable way to go than whatever I could come up with. And the thing is what stopped me from doing that behavior was the idea is I didn't want another first responder to come to that scene. And it wasn't my grandchildren. It wasn't the legion of friends that I had. It doesn't make sense to the casual observer, but that's why I stopped doing that. Because there's something about going to an accident like that in the first place. But when you realize it's a first responder, it's even worse, because I think we see ourselves in that first responder at times.
Absolutely.
Until the time that I found myself on a bridge and ready to jump. And that was when the spirit of my son said, Dad, your story doesn't end here. There's work to do. And he said it as plain as you and I talking right now. So there's a spiritual component. I don't have big answers for how does that work or anything like that. I can't tell you. I just know it did. Mm-hmm. When I walked off that bridge, I wasn't fixed. There was a lot of work to do. So I went to a Save a Warrior retreat to start, and then came back and sought mental health assistance through the VA and the Vet Center, which is part of the VA, but it's kind of a storefront, not at the big VA. And those were extremely helpful in my journey. It was painful, to be sure, to bring these things up and deal with them. But, man, on the other end, man, life is great. Life is so good.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to go back a little bit because there's a lot of points that I think will be really helpful for the audience to kind of dissect. And when you said, you're meant to remember these things and these traumas that happen early in life, it made me think about just how your body is just wired to survive, right? Like, and you get these inputs, and then it informs your psyche, your subconscious, and then even your behavior, right? To try to avoid these things. And how am I going to get through this? Or you suppress it, right? And it makes me think of the body keeps the score. I know a lot of folks talk about that. Is that kind of, am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. And when I speak in front of audiences, I use, an example of, if we go back to the caveman days, you have to remember not to eat these berries.
Yeah.
Because you saw what happened when your friend ate them, he died. Okay, so you file that and you deal with it. And I think in society, not just today, but for the last 100 years, maybe I don't know, we've done a disservice to ourselves in the idea of let's just forget it, move on, just forget it, just and I know part of this is how we look back on our, let's say our veterans, World War II veterans. They didn't complain, they just came back and built America. They suffered. Those guys suffered. Their families suffered. And it's just something we don't talk about. And but we carry that legacy of just stick to it. Coming up, a lot of my mentors, my football coaches, your PE teachers, all guys, a lot of them were World War II veterans, and these guys that you looked up to. When I joined the Marine Corps, Vietnam and Korea veterans, and these were tough guys, and you wanted to be like them. You didn't want to disappoint them. So you looked at them and said, okay, I want to emulate that. They've been there, they saw that, and look at them. They just they move forward. Kind of a Clint Eastwood kind of model. But if we look at the Clint Eastwood model in almost all his movies, I can't think of one that's different. He's divorced. His family hates him. He lives by himself.
Yeah, there's no like illusion to what that would lead you to.
He's leading a terrible life, and who wants that? We're not. That's not what I want. I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive and just be a good human. And, I had to go through this and to get on that other side.
Yeah, those are great examples. I think the generational thing comes up a lot, right? We look at younger generations, we talk about snowflakes and you're so special, and the incidence of mental health disorders and diagnoses are through the roof. So it's a weaker generation is one narrative, and then the other narrative is that we are more emotionally aware. There's better science. There's more socialization to reduce these stigmas. And even going back to the World War II, the greatest generation, I think it is really healthy to recognize, hey, whether you feel this way or that way, it's not apples to apples. I think most people would agree, even the remaining folks of that generation and the boomers and everyone in between would say, yeah, there are more stressful, or just kind of the dosage of stress is higher than ever, right? It's like we recognize the stress from media and social media and all these other things. We have to contend with it a different way. And most of us also recognize the first responder world has shifted in the last few decades, right, to the amount and the volume of stress incident, right? We look at fentanyl, and you could just probably stop right there and be like, okay, emergency personnel having to deal with this epidemic, how much death and hurt and consoling family and impacting communities, and just a multitude of ways. It's not the same. And so rather than maybe what I'm trying to offer is some of the more traditional mindsets saying, well, we should go back to that. It's like, well, it's kind of a moot point. We are where we are, and let's just try to think about how we can best navigate so we can thrive, right? As you point out, like you're just living life and being well rather than just purely surviving. If that's like our only real goal, like keeping your head above the water or actually climbing out of the water.
Exactly. And I know as a therapist, when I work with first responders, I tell them up front, my goal is to help you achieve that good human spot, and a lot of times they say, I just want to be that person I was before. I say, well, that ship has sailed. Our experiences as first responders, as veterans, as just people, indicate that we change. Every experience changes us. But we can still pursue that good human part. And whether that means you remain in the fire service or law enforcement, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you've done your service and it's time for a new career, or you stay in the career, but now you have more tools now to help you to be that good human. Because at the core of it, that's what it takes, right? To be a really good police officer, a really good firefighter. I think that it's, starting as a good human.
Yeah.
And when we all joined our services, we came in with all those, I just want to help people. I want to be that person. Yeah, let's maintain that. But in order to do that, though, when things happen, let's unpack it. Let's put it in its proper perspective. Let's have some tools in our toolbox to help us, down the line.
Yeah, I love that. And that reminds me of what you're saying earlier about how if you had a peer, if you had a buddy on your crew that was going through something and came to you, hey, Mike, I don't know what to do. And you knew exactly what to do, right? Because you're a good friend, you're a good team member. You know these things, but then you don't give yourself the grace to accept it. Whether it's humility, talked about ego. Man, I think that that's so prevalent in warrior culture, whatever you want to call it, like first responders, veterans. These people that they are so devoted to serving others that they neglect themselves. I think it's even a thing that we see in peer support, and I've spoken to that before, where there's an unlimited amount of peer support you can do, potentially to your detriment, right? You can be so worried about other people and being there in their time of crisis, and meanwhile ignoring your own declining health or your own deteriorating family situation. What are your thoughts on that, having been through everything you've been through in the career and then following now being a therapist as well?
You're spot on. And one of the things we do, I just completed assisting in a how to assist individuals and groups in crisis class. And so these are all prospective peer support people from Coast Guard, fire, law enforcement, you name it. And that's one of the things we hammer is just like, you got to take care of yourself. You got to be able to step back, even if you feel good and maybe you are feeling good, take a breather, and, listen to other people. If they say, man, you've helped people through like 4 or 5 really deep things in the last few months. Maybe it's time for you to step off and don't answer the phone for a month or so. And, and then you going back to me, it's, I think there's just a lot of ego involved. I mean, I'm Mike Washington, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. I'm Mike Washington, Seattle Fire Department, Engine 27. I'm Mike Washington, Healthy Baby Hawaii, 1965. Mm-hmm. I had a lot on my shoulders, to live up to, and I just wasn't going to reach out because I figured I could fix it myself, and I could not. So that's something that we hammer on a lot with the various peer support teams that I work with, is that you got to put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else.
Yeah, that's such a thing. And I guess combining some of the things we've already talked about, I mean, you're talking about all the accomplishments and kind of the badassery, if you will, of all the things you've done and continue to do. So I don't need help, right? Like, I'm the one going in emergency mode. I'm going into the building where no one else is going, right? I'm getting up in the middle of the night and saving lives. I'm not the one needing to call 911. So there is that flip. And a lot of times that maybe whether it's overconfidence or just over focus on the mission, that's super necessary and helpful for in the moment, but then to take a step back and look at the big picture and even to kind of bridge some things together. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because you talked about and shared some of the things that happened to you, these traumas that happened to you early in life. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you're reflective to recognize that is what has helped you get to the point where you are, right? Leading you to service, but also building this resilience for you to be able to help so many people. I would say that those things are part of your superhero origin story to make you the badass that you are. And I know that anecdotally, a lot of people recognize that a lot of first responders and military folks get into what is a very uncommon desire, right? We look at the total populace, like you're putting it all out there. You're potentially readying yourself for the ultimate sacrifice for strangers because you believe in this greater thing and this very noble thing. Oftentimes it takes something happening to you or a loved one or someone in your community where you're like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing because it matters. I'm going to do this thing and stand up for injustice. I'm going to do this thing and put myself behind others, right? Put others ahead of myself. And I suppose this is a long-winded way of saying, like, I think that it would be helpful if people recognize like those quote unquote perceived weaknesses, like are not only contributing to their strength, but probably a reason for a lot of their strength.
I agree 100%. Yeah. I think it's all of the above. There, if you can look at a pie chart and slice up, why are you here? What's your why?
Yeah.
And there's going to be various reasons. I mean, I've met some great firefighters, police officers, and Marines who just needed a job, but they found their calling, and they were great. A lot of people, when they were growing up and something bad happened to them, whether it was a fire or something in their house, and police or fire showed up and just made that impression, like, I want to be like those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And, it comes in. And, one of the other things that we talk about now in peer support is that you don't do this alone, right? You have a team of people here, and you need to reach out, and just check in. Team leads need to do that for your peers. And so, for example, with Seattle PD, Dion Perkins, she's my partner,
Mm-hmm.
primarily because, first of all, I don't, didn't know anything about police work. 32 years on a fire engine does not equate to understanding law enforcement, as well. So, but, she's the type who everybody knows her, so it's, as when she shows up, everybody's like, oh, Dion, what's going on? Hey, this is Mike Washington. And then, so when we come up on things, we are reaching out to each other and going, hey, what does this mean for an officer when they're talking about this? Or she'll ask me questions. And so that team approach is huge,
100%.
And again, you're not shouldering all of that on your own. So that's a big point that we're trying to make in the peer support world right now too. You're not doing this by yourself. You shouldn't do it by yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And because that is the point of the team, right? Like, not everyone is scoring goals every moment of the game. Right. There have to be people to recover. You gotta take a seat, right? That bench is there for a reason. And whether it's operations, like you just went through something, you just performed 8 on a kid, whether it went well or whether it didn't go well, like that's a huge impact. And if you have the ability, again, if you're unsure, you're, man, like my head's kind of cloudy, just accept that sign and let someone else step in, right? Take a moment, because as soon as you have that doubt, it's probably ego driven. Maybe, no, I got to stay in this, and distract yourself. But again, flip that. If it was your buddy and said, hey man, I'm just kind of, my head's not really in it for a sec. Like I'm not super focused. Like, absolutely, you'd be like, please just take a moment, man. Like, go back to the station for a little bit, or Sarge, right? Like your bat chief or what have you. Like, if you're a leader, you need to recognize those things and err on the side of caution. Just say like, hey, it's not personal. Like, I just want you to be well, right? Explain the why, so someone's not like, man, I'm messing up. And I love how you explain that for peer support as well, because it can be so taxing to be that person always checking in, to be that person tapped. You're sitting in on debriefs, you're facilitating them. I personally felt that huge drain when we were doing a lot of them. And in reflection, I was like, yeah, you're getting exposed to all this trauma that you weren't even going to the scene for. And you're probably getting this view in this really intimate, extremely detailed way beyond a lot of the people that were on scene, because you're getting it all. You're getting the fire hose, right? Pun intended. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and bringing up warrior retreats, right? Like the first responder retreats, there's many great ones. Oftentimes it takes really forcing you out of your routines and your habit to really, I suppose, break that habit or the necessity to be like, no, I got to be on all the time. Yeah.
Well, and it's our professions are slow turning ships, right? It takes a while to get there. And I look back on the fire service. When I came in, it was nothing for you to walk around in the living spaces with your turnouts still on, at least your bottoms on, right? And have them by your bed when you sleep at night. We don't do that anymore. If I did that at a station right now, the young people there would look at me like I'm nuts.
Yeah.
And they should, because all the carcinogens that are off-gassing off of these turnouts. Now we have washing machines. We have 2 sets of turnouts, and we immediately wash that dirty set, and just things we just never thought of before. And I remember when they first started talking about that, I'm going like, well, what's the big deal? Until somebody's, so here's the big deal. Here's why we're doing this. I'm like, oh, okay. Now, like I said, any given fire station, I say in the Puget Sound area, this is what we do. We do these things after a fire.
Yeah.
They're not like it was back in the day. So now we're looking at peer support and taking care of ourselves. And going back to the being a peer support provider, it was when I deployed to OSO. And we were up there for about 3 weeks with a couple days off in between. And when we were finally done, I was exhausted. Now, I wasn't digging. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. We were just doing peer support, as it turns out, for everybody up there, civilians who had lost family members and who were part of the response, the first responders, just everybody. And just hearing some, just really sad stories. And that's when I just really understood that, okay, you're exhausted because you just got dumped on by about 300 people over the course of 3 weeks. And that's when the idea of that secondary trauma being real just really hit home for me.
Yeah.
And, not too long ago, maybe about 3-4 months ago, during debriefing, as they were describing things, it called back something for me. So it was incumbent for me that once we were done, I knew I was in a good spot. And so what I knew as I felt this, that I had to, touch it when we were done, okay, what's going on? And in this case, I, reached out to my therapist at the VA and I said, hey, I was doing a debriefing and, I was feeling these things. I'm just kind of reporting it. I think I've worked with it, well, but I just wanted to get your point of view on it. So, therapy is a big part of being a therapist. Therapists need therapists.
Yeah. I love that. I've spoken to a therapist that, as you want to call it brashly, said, if you have a therapist that doesn't have a therapist, then you need to fire that therapist. Like, they don't know what the F they're talking about. I think that's the word she said, or really close quote. Wasn't on a podcast, but I appreciated the straightforwardness, right? Because that was one thing that I wanted to ask you, and I presume, now that you are a therapist, you are a provider. You're taking on a lot of that, and that needs to be processed and offloaded as well, right?
Yep. And even just sharing it with your team. So I have Dion Perkins in Seattle. I got James Brack up in Bellevue.
Yep.
Super people, and just sharing that with them who are in the profession, is helpful. I don't go, oh well, these people aren't therapists, so I'm not going to talk to them. So no, we're part of the same team.
Mm-hmm.
We do the same things, and I can share some of these things. And if I feel I need to move it up to my therapist, I'm more than happy to do that. So it's that team concept. I just can't get away from that anymore. And just having super people in that world. I'm so fortunate to have the James and the Dions and Kristen Cox at Seattle Fire, and just some terrific humans that I'm working with. It's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Big names in the region for that reason, right? The credibility and the care. And I love that focus on team. You keep bringing it up because it's not about, you made mention like, hey, they're not therapists, but we're in the same goal, the same mission, right? Which is supporting everybody, just to be able to share that and connect and then release some tension. And, it's all collaborative. And that's where I like to say, like, when we talk about peer support, when I said it's one of the most critical functions, that's not about like I got peer support next to my name on the the personnel roster. That's just everybody has an involvement with peer support, right? It's building this culture within your team, within your organization, where you're checking in with your buddy. You don't have to be quote unquote into wellness or into peer support, but it's just checking in, and then you recognize like, that's the stuff. Like, it's always been the stuff that made the difference, and now we have a heightened awareness, so we just need to continue to lean in and build that.
Absolutely. It's critical. And as slow turning as our ship is, it is turning. So a lot of the younger firefighters and officers, the idea of mental health is not a foreign concept to them. They probably grew up with counselors in their schools and had some kind of incident where, okay, you're going to talk to a counselor. So it's not a big scary thing like it was for my generation.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my generation, it was like, you're going to see a therapist? What, are you nuts? What's wrong with you? You're either soft or you're crazy, one of the two. And so you just shied away from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really helping out in the overall profession, at least here in the Puget Sound area.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I touched on it before, and maybe I'll bring it up again because it's really fresh in my mind, this traditional mindset of, are we talking about too much, and are we creating these issues? As essentially what was brought up to me recently. And I for years, that would not have even occurred to me, like to even think that that's a potential angle. When I talk about how the diagnoses and maybe certain folks truly believe that we're talking about too much and we're bringing up these traumas, and now officers are focused on the traumas which may not have affected them, and now they're in their field of view, and now it's clouding their brains. They're like, maybe I am messed up. Like, I truly don't believe that's a thing. And even to take it back generations that are, now, let's just say past, right? I have, as an adult, found out so many examples within my extended family, and this is not as when I bring up anything like this, it's not to throw shade. It's just to recognize the dynamics so we can learn from it and be better for each other. But you talk about, kind of that Clint Eastwood model, right? Like, you don't talk about, you just kind of soldier through. You talk about relationships and generations before us, especially in my culture, Asian cultures. You don't talk about stuff. You don't talk about feelings. You don't talk about anything. You hardly use the word love. I don't know if this is true, but there's been examples where they said different Asian cultures don't really have a word for love, truly in the same way that we use in Western culture. But I've come to find in my adulthood that many of the relationships that I met and I saw and observed, and I'm like, oh, they're a really great couple, right? Like great aunt and uncle, or my own grandparents, right? To see them as this stoic, just no complaint, everything's good. So I assumed, yeah, everything's good. They're in love. They're like a devoted companionship, all these awesome things. But then to come to find out that there are some that were miserable, right? It was because of societal pressure that they could never express it. No, I'm not just saying like divorce, but like they could never talk about it. So how are you going to work through your issues and stay together in a healthy, happy way if you can't talk about stuff? Or, think about this peer support dynamic. Could my great uncle talk to, his buddy and be like, yeah, things aren't great right now. Well, have you tried reading this book? Like, no, that was not happening. Right. So,
Right.
kind of this long-winded way to say, like, if we're going to draw that example, just because we don't hear about the issues and we certainly didn't have the documentation of the issues from prior, doesn't mean that they weren't there. They were just under the rug and we weren't peeling back the rug.
Right. That's exactly right. I'm a big reader on the Second World War, and there were tons of psychiatric casualties during the war. But that doesn't fit the narrative of the greatest generation, right? Mm-hmm. So we just kind of edit that out. Everybody was storming the beach on D-Day and all these things, which documented. I mean, gosh, what a great service they provided, but there was a cost to it. Yep. There was a huge cost, and when we don't recognize that, now we just feel like our generations just aren't that great. Which is what we're doing now to the younger generations now. It's not a fun thing like it used to be. It's really there's a meanness, there's a sharpness to how we describe the people that are coming up, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all, and I try hard to intervene when I can when I hear people talk about it like that. I had this one lieutenant in the fire department who was just so angry about the idea that one of his probies said to him that he had never run a chainsaw until he joined the fire department. Mm. And to him, that was just crazy. Why are we hiring people who've never touched a chainsaw? I said, you know what? That's the same thing with me. I never touched a chainsaw until the fire department. And he was just, he was going through a conniption almost. Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, I grew up in apartments in LA and Honolulu. Why? Nobody had
a chainsaw there. Yeah.
I saw chainsaws on TV, and people lived out in the woods and stuff like that. And I didn't hunt. I never fired a gun until the Marine Corps, and gun culture is just not my culture. I like shooting when I do it, mm-hmm. but I don't own a gun, and I'm glad I didn't, because I think I would have ended my life if I had. But we just have to just kind of tap the brakes a little bit and go, okay, somebody taught me when I got here, so I'm going to teach this young person who is, seems to be struggling, or not even struggling, just doesn't know.
Yeah.
Just don't know, and
it's such a thing.
Yeah,
Same thing in police.
that's
Like I remember hearing these anecdotes, like the different generations. Oh, this person's never changed a tire. Maybe they never had to. Maybe they never got a flat tire. Or to that point, right? Like the common one was like, this person's never been in a fight.
mhm,
Like I didn't grow up fighting. Like I grew up fighting with my sister, right, and like
mhm.
wrestling with my buddies, but it never got like over the top. But yeah, just how we attach ourselves to these things that just they shift with culture. And again, like I've talked about this in the recruiting sense because I've written about it, but the generational or the over, um, I guess maybe injecting these feelings and perceptions to what the generations mean and where we're going wrong and the direction of the world. I mean, I feel like every generation's always said that, like certain aspects of that generation, right? Like certain members within, and it's you could call them like the crotchety old timers, right? There's always been that. So even the greatest generation, I would venture to guess that the generation ahead that raised them said, "What is going on with these guys? Like rock and roll music, and like
Oh yeah,
you got to be out your mind. Like the Satan's going to take over, and the U.S. is going to fall to USSR, right? Like
right.
certain doom. Like it's always been a thing, and I think for some, it's just that leaning towards negativity. I mean, certainly there's translations within our first responder culture and organizational health and culture. Like, are we focusing on the positive and how we can uplift and just do the job better as a team? Or are we focusing on all the things that would drive us apart and all the negativity? Because there's plenty of that. There's plenty of cynicism. Like, you don't have to look for it.
Right. And that's that conscious choice to go to that light instead of staying in the dark. You have a choice, so you can do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Earlier when you were talking about that risk-seeking behavior, I've thought the same thing. I've written about that as well for Police One, where I wonder how much of that is because you are exposed to so much stress and so much trauma. You become, it's like compassion fatigue, right? You become numb, and then in some ways, like you're driving towards that just to feel something. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, there's that aspect of adrenaline, and some people are just kind of into it. That's why you're doing this job. But then when you're getting into a structure fire, like after the, you know, first couple dozen times, like you don't really feel that. Like it doesn't feel stressful. The first
Hmm.
few code runs are awesome, and then a couple years later, you're like, I've been listening to my siren going like 90 miles per hour for a few minutes now. Like I'm kind of bored. Like when is there going to be something changing? Like I'm tired of listening to the siren and weaving around traffic. Like when can we just end this pursuit? When can I get this guy or what
Hmm.
have you? Right. Um, yeah. Do you think that's a prevalent thing within first responder culture?
I don't know. That's a good point. I know with veterans that's been a thing. You come back from deployment, and you're riding your bike, your motorcycle at 110 miles an hour down the freeway. It's because yeah, life back here is not the exciting thing that it was out there. I know for me, my risky behavior was more a suicide attempt
Mm,
but I didn't know it at the time. Even closing my eyes and going through this very busy intersection against the light just seemed like a thrill. But I can look back on it now and go like, okay, this is I hope how it ends, because this is a good way for it to end, as opposed to other ways of suicide. My name gets remembered in a better way than it would otherwise. And that's in your head. And if you've never been in that space before, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't, and it doesn't make sense to me now on the other side. But I get it. I get why I was thinking that, because my
mm-hmm.
thinking is not right. Anxiety to depression, PTSD, all these things are just raining down on me, so I'm doing these things now, and it doesn't make sense, but that's what you're doing. But yeah, going back to your point for veterans, um, I know in my son's battalion, they lost a couple of guys, lost a lot of guys to suicide, but guys to accidents, like I said, just riding their bikes just way too fast and just ending it. So
Yeah. And I'll share personally, and I appreciate you clarifying because there's a lot of veins of this, right? There's that wanting to feel like the adrenaline junkie, but then there's just wanting to you're kind of numb and you want to feel something, and then there's suicidal, right? There's
mhm.
depressed and suicide. Um, all things that are just affecting us in all these different directions. For me, I recall how high on life I felt after my shooting, and I know that there's a lot of different common responses to a near-death experience. And for me, I feel fortunate that mine was a very positive one. We all know folks that had a very negative one. When I was in a space in time when I felt extremely overwhelmed with career and family and some personal things, some professional things, I remember feeling like I wanted like another thing, right? I wanted another near-death experience, and I wasn't suicidal, but I can share that I was very low. I was feeling unwell, like I was feeling overburdened and really stressed and taxed, where I remember literally thinking, man, if I had that feeling again, maybe if I had another close call, that would snap me out of this. And maybe a lot of listeners would be like, "Man, that's not even like, that's not rational." Like, and that's the point. It's not because you're not well, you're not functioning at your best, you're not on top of it. I was undersleeping and all these things. And if you ask me at the moment how many amazing things I had in my life, I would say many. However, right, I'd add a but to it. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that could be a thing that it was hard for me to recognize in myself until I was out of it or trying to work my way out of it. Right. I had that feeling, and then I felt guilty for having that feeling, that later that day, I was like, man, I'm really hoping for like a near-death experience. Like, how ridiculous is that? And how selfish is that to my wife and to my family? Like, if that were to happen, I'd be high on life, and then everyone would be terrified that I'm still doing this job. And then you feel bad for thinking it, and these kind of internal guilt mechanisms, some variety of shame. So throw that out there in case anyone can recognize that at different times in their life or career, just to say, hey, like, it's just another thing, this other weird kind of curveball where you're like, okay, give yourself some time, right? Take a breath, give yourself some space and some grace.
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to work with OISs in a different way now, to so that officer can go ahead and be in a safe spot to say, this is how I felt in the moment, this is how I'm feeling now. And like I said, just make that experience one that's not so scary, that you're not crazy. No, this is just kind of how we respond as human beings. You're actually kind of right where you're supposed to be at. Okay, now where do we want to go from here? We try to work on that. And the other thing too is that you kind of mentioned, family and other things too. For a lot of us in this work, it's not even the work. It's the work combined with outside stressors, family stuff, or a lot of people about my age and maybe a little bit younger, dealing with parents now that need help.
Yeah.
And usually it's suddenly, and suddenly it's just like, well, they've been hiding it and trying to keep it on their own for a while. And suddenly you're the man who's got to figure out what to do with your parents. I've got probably about 4 different people I'm working with who that is their main stressor. And then the job, right? And then we have to model that good behavior too, about, trying to eat right, sleep, cut down on the caffeine, cut down on the alcohol, giving sleep hygiene that respect that it's due, because we don't. Because when we're young, if you're in college, I don't need sleep, but we used to stay up all night and, do these study sessions or party. In the military, we used to do these ops, and, well, okay, awesome, gold star for you. But now to do these jobs properly, you need to have good sleep. And I get it. A lot of folks are, working overtime, and there's a lot of mandatory overtime. But again, this is a decision that you get to make, that I'm not going to work this overtime that I don't have to, and I'm going to start working on my sleep properly. But other stuff too, like getting exercise, and because it's super easy to blink your eye and go from the guy who was the athlete, now you're 20, 30 pounds overweight. And because a lot of it is stress and not eating properly, and boom, there you are. Yeah. And as you get older, it's tougher to go back. So, so we got to front load that good behavior and recognize that it's not just the job, because I have people who say, we used to say, if you do this job, you're going to get PTSD. That's going to happen. That's not true. That is 100% not true. And you might go through some things, but if you access the help that's out there, it's designed to help you not get into that space. And if you go to that incident and you do get, no kidding, PTSD, and that's a whole another segment where we talk about what is post-traumatic stress, what's post-traumatic stress injury, and what's post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not a life sentence, right? You can come back from that,
absolutely,
if you want to, but you got to do the work and be able to sit down and be willing to do that. So
yeah.
There's just a lot of things out there, to take a look at. And it's, once we get people to understand that, and again, we're trying to work with people younger and younger in the academies, when they're on FTO, and, when they're students, and, and they're on probation in the fire service, it pays dividends down the line on their health and welfare, the welfare of their family, just being that good human, which means you can be that really good firefighter and be that good police officer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you made that differentiation, because still, as we're learning these things, as we're reducing the stigma, a lot of folks hear PTS and they're like, oh, that's PTSD. And then they hear PTSI and they're like, oh, what is that? But yeah, so we are all exposed to a lot of stress, right? Critical stress. And we all experience post-traumatic stress symptoms, right? And that's, you experience it, but whether or not it's a injury or disorder, could you walk us through and kind of differentiating that for the listeners?
Yeah, you think about post-traumatic stress, and the example I like to use is because I've done it, where you're cleaning the gutters on your house, right? You got a ladder up, you're cleaning the gutters, and instead of coming down and moving the ladder like you should, and especially if you got like a daylight basement on the other side of your house, so you're up 30 feet, you either overreach or you hop the ladder, you do something really stupid.
Not a firefighter.
Maybe I'm the only one who does that. I
was a house painter in college, and we did all the things that OSHA would lose their minds if they ever came by the job site. Yeah. And
you have that one where the ladder slips, and for that instant, your body goes through the same exact stressors as any other incident you go through, because your mind's telling you, I could be seriously injured or killed right now doing this. Your pupils dilate, your blood pressure and heart rate go up. You're going through the fight or flight thing. And then once you correct it, okay, so I didn't fall to my death or a serious injury. You're kind of breathing heavy. You come down and you kind of go, okay, man, that was close. In a couple minutes, you're back up the ladder, probably doing the same thing, thinking you're doing it more safely I'm just going to hop it once. Okay, post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress injury is maybe when you've collected a few of these incidences. And I'm not saying the cleaning the gutter thing, but on the job, for example, you collected some of these incidences, and you're feeling there's a change to you. Your eating habits are different. You're not sleeping well, things of that nature. Now it's an injury. Now, if we think of our injuries like if you twisted your ankle, right? You're out running, you're playing a sport, you twist your ankle. The first thing you should do is get off your ankle, ice it, elevate it, maybe put a splint on it, maybe be on some crutches, right? Until it gets better. And it'll get better. But you paid attention to it, you did the things that you're supposed to do. Commonly, what we do is we walk it off, right? So now you're out there, maybe you got off of it for a day or two. Okay, I feel better. Okay, let me just run a little bit. Well, you're making it worse, right? And you're not paying attention to it. And over the years, when you keep doing that to that ankle without doing the things you need to do, at some point, you might need a surgery to correct that. And that's the equivalent of the PTSD. Now there's something wrong with this that ice and elevation isn't going to fix. We need to do some deep work into this. And so that's the way the examples I use to differentiate what is post-traumatic stress, injury, and then disorder. I have a friend, he's a Vietnam veteran, and when he'd take his family out camping, he would do things like, kind of see if this position was defensible, right? And I get it. I'm a retired Marine, and I do that thing too. And if you're in law enforcement or fire, You kind of look at a building, you go into a restaurant, okay, the exit's over there, okay. Um, you look at people because that's just what we do. For him, the idea of camping in this particular spot that he didn't find that was defensible from an unseen enemy was one that would make him move campgrounds. And it was like, well, why are you doing that? It's because I felt like I couldn't defend this spot.
Yeah.
I'm like, against who? Against Charlie. Charlie, you're at wherever campground here in Washington State. He says, yeah, but in my head, I'm always looking at that. And I said, I get it. I do the same thing. I'd set up my machine guns here. I put claymores out here. My mortars would be back here. But for me, it's just a fun exercise, which may sound weird. But
we're weird. Hey, if you're doing this thing, we're weird. It's okay.
Yeah, we're different. But nothing's going to make me, move it up because I'm afraid we're going to get overrun. It's not going to happen. But for him, his post-traumatic stress disorder was such that he was altering his behavior. He was going right back. And, part of the big thing is when we deal with these things, we don't want you to forget it, but we don't want you to relive it. Right? That's the big difference. And for him, he was reliving it even when he was just going camping. And he was, at night, he's I'm wide awake. I'm checking the lines. I'm going, for what? NBA are coming, So, well, they're not coming here, but he was working on it. But and I liken it to, folks in our profession who can't go to a restaurant if they can't have the seat that's facing the front.
Yep.
Facing the entry. So we all like to do that, right? We all like having the best view of the most people that are coming in. That's just how we are. However, for me, and maybe it's because I was not in law enforcement, I'm not going to say, well, if this is the only place you got, we're going to go eat someplace else until I find one where I can sit and do this. And most of us don't do that, but there are some folks who are just, that's where their headspace is. They have to. It's a must, or I'm going to change my behavior here and go do something else. Or we're going home. We're not doing this after all. And now I'm upset. I'm upset that I couldn't get that place. And I'm on edge.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely. And I've used that example before where I prefer to face, I prefer to have my back to the wall. I prefer to face the door. I'm usually carrying. However, there's been times when my wife sits down and she's like, oh, she prefers the booth, of course it's comfy, but she's like, hey, do you want to switch? And there's been times I'm like, breath, no, nope, I'm good. Right. And it's just, it is a challenge. And some people, they're not going to do that, and no judgment. And some people, like myself, are going to take a moment and be like, you know what, I'm aware. And I also am aware, like, I want to be here as, as someone on a date with his wife. And I am taking that extra precaution. Like you can't turn the vigilance all the way off, and you don't want to. You go into downtown or an unfamiliar area or a riskier area. I have my own things where I'm dreading the parade attending age with my kiddo, right? Like, I know it's going to happen. We're going to go to this big parade downtown at some point, but then it may inform where I want to park, right? It may inform, do I want to go 4 levels down in a parking garage where we can't get out, or do we talk briefly about which way we want to go if there's something like an explosion? That can sound extremely debilitating to a lot of civilians that haven't been in these types of risky kind of risk assessment situations, but to each their own. The key is recognizing it, I think, and then just toggling in a way that you can be healthy and well. Because some people would say, yeah, if I try to suppress that, I'm not healthy and well. Which I totally get that. I was recently at a family friend's baby naming in the Jewish tradition. It was at a synagogue, and I couldn't help but sit there and think, man, there's a lot of messed up people out there that hate people just because they're Jewish. And I couldn't help but think, how many rounds do I have, and what are my options with my back to the door? Like, I was just, hey, you're not going to sit way on the side and watching the door. I'm not going to post guard in the parking lot. I'm going to be here in this moment and celebrate with people I care about. However, you're being, in a way that's mindful and acceptable for you, and only you can decide that. But I hope that this conversation and the examples that you shared, Mike, help people kind of conceptualize and maybe walk themselves back a little bit if they do recognize and maybe do that buddy check, maybe talk to your spouse, but maybe just talk to like your battle buddy to say, hey, this is kind of my thought process and feeling process. Because maybe they're going to say, yeah, man, like you're a little bit on edge. Just, yeah, try to walk it back.
Sure.
Or an MHP. Yeah.
And if you have, these physical manifestations, so using your example at the synagogue, and you're sitting there and, okay, I'm not in the position I want to be in. I'm tense. My foot's tapping, I'm looking around. I'm not present at this, joyful event. Yeah, maybe there's some things that we need to work with. Otherwise, just your thought, what you just shared with me about your thought process, to me is just like if you're going to go on a road trip in your car and you're checking the tires, making sure the air is all in, and you might be checking things more than the average person might, but it's okay. Now you're going to go get in your car and you're going to have a great road trip.
Yeah.
You've done the things you needed to do. But if you're just all like, oh, this tire's 2 pounds under pressure, okay, maybe we should talk a little bit, and just unpack. Yeah. It's just unpacking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that self-check, and I don't want to breeze too far through it, but I know I've kept you for a while, but I love how you brought up the different facets of health and wellness, right? And, we've spoken about it here before, but really these are the things: sleep, proper nutrition, exercise. These are the things that get hard when things are bad, but they're the things that if they're the more normal or as practically and as regularly as you can attend to these things, that are going to help you navigate the bad days, the bad moments better, right? And I've found that in myself. I mean, a host of our first responder community will attest to that when, yes, like life is stressful. You talk to all your friends in the civilian world that aren't veterans or don't do first responder work, like their boss is blowing them up at all hours. They got, orthodontics to pay for. They have a loss in the family. They have an ailing parent, as you brought up, right? Like life is just kind of hard enough, but we got to invest in ourselves. We got to take care of the things we can. And then for most of those listeners out there, you are throwing on this very big thing on top of life. Your life does not excuse you from the fact that just because you're a first responder, you don't have to deal with a parent that's aging and ailing. No, like right. You don't get a pass on that. You don't have a pass on trouble with fertility when you're trying to have a family, build a family. You don't get a pass from diagnosis with your kid. This is just life, and you have all this other stuff that we recognize on top of that. So please, take the moment, accept the help. I just want to take a moment to kind of circle back to that.
Yeah, and in closing, when I went through, my mental health struggles, and I did it alone, and it didn't work, but it paid dividends. That journey on the way back paid dividends when I got my cancer diagnosis last year. And I was like, I'm putting it out to my community.
Yeah.
I'll send in good wishes, good thoughts. I had people who were familiar with that cancer, and people who had, some great advice and just good thoughts, I'm so blessed to just have so many good people out there, man. Life is good. Life is so good. There's so many good people out there. And I'm convinced that my battle with cancer went the way it did because of these people, my village, my tribe, if you will, with the good thoughts and everything else. People who brought stuff to my house and things like that. So I'm so grateful for that. But I think that was a dividend of going through this thing by myself. I don't think I would do as well if I just kept it to myself. I may not even be here, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I believe it. And I was watching from afar and checking the updates, and it was extremely inspirational. And I believe what you're saying, right? It's that community. It's your willingness to accept the community, right? So you're paying credit to others. You're an integral piece of that as well. So, man, what an inspiration in so many ways. And I'm glad we touched on that as well, as far as the resilience that, so much of it was through everything you've experienced and everything you've shared about today.
Community, man. That's the big takeaway, man. I've got a great wife, Valerie. She's That's my why.
Yeah.
That's my why right there. And then all the great people I work with, our relationship, Dion and Brack and Kristen and just a host more. There's not enough time for me to go down the list.
For
but
sure.
I'm just working with tremendous people. Even being part of that class the other day just refills you. Just you feel good because here's a new group that want to go out there and help, and you just feel like, man, there's some super people out there. All the new kids coming into law enforcement and fire, man, thank you. Thank you for doing that. The recruiting poster for law enforcement is a punch in the head, and yet we've got great people signing up to do this job. I love it, man. I love my officers, man. I love my firefighters.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Is there anything you'd like to close with? And please tell listeners where they can find you.
No, I think I've run my mouth as much as I could.
Me too.
My name, my email is topwashington0211 at gmail.com. Phone number is 253-222-6707. If you got any questions about this, some things I know a lot about, some things are just my personal opinions on my journey and what it looks like. And I'm always learning. And yeah, man, let's keep building this community.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your work too. Thanks for this. This is awesome.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure, and truly grateful to be part of the circle. You brought up certain individuals like Dion and Brack, but yeah, just to be a part of it and just to be part of something positive and something necessary. It's my sincere honor.
Mine too, along with you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.